Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now let's continue with our this video, part 5 of our chapter 21, economics. Now, this time we are going to talk about one rather difficult topic, okay, or not difficult but complicated topic of redistribution effects of the unanticipated inflation. Okay, now before we look at the theories, I suggest we actually talk about this topic with a story. So it's story time. Okay, now again, let's think about iPhone. Okay, now originally, imagine iPhone was worth $200. Okay, so in order to get one iPhone, you would need $200. Right? Now, assume there is an inflation such that the price of iPhone becomes 300 instead. Now, in order to get one iPhone, you would need $300 instead. So do you see? The story is that when there is a so-called increase in price level, okay, increase in price level. Now what happens is that the nominal value of money needs to go up in order to retain, okay, to retain the so-called purchasing power. 係咪啊？我哋要個金額高咗嗱。What it means is that $300 today is has the same purchasing power as $200 of yesterday because of inflation. Okay, now so I hopefully you get the logic behind this story. Now with this story in mind, let's look at what we are going to talk about here. Now, like we said, increase in price level would automatically means a drop in the so-called real purchasing power. Now, knowing that later on there would be some inflation, what would people do? People would prevent loss by adjusting the so-called interest rate. Okay, now with this in mind, let's look at another story. Okay, another story. Now let's say now you need money, so you ask me to lend you some money, right? So here, Liu Chen as a lender, 係咪啊？我係借錢出去嗰個啦 ，as a lender. Okay, so here, let's say I lend out $100 to you today. Now, but in my heart, I am expecting 嗱，預期啫 expecting the day when you return money, I'm expecting the price level would increase, let's say by 20%. Okay, so naturally, what would be my reaction? I would set an interest rate no less than 20% so that I at least do not lose money. So, expecting this, what I would do, I will set the interest rate. Now, since you are my student, I'm not going to earn any money off you, right? So, I set exactly the interest rate as 20%. So, just to compensate for the drop in purchasing power. Okay, so this is the beginning of the story. Now, when we talk about redistribution effects, we are talking about when this expected inflation rate does not match that of the so-called actual, okay, actual inflation rate. Now, for example, right? For example, let's say scenario 1. the actual, okay, the actual inflation, okay, the actual inflation is only, no, 10%. So what happens is that, now, I expect, okay, now, here, let's say, only 10% of inflation. So, now, let's think about it. This $100, if we are to keep the same purchasing power, okay, to keep same purchasing power, how much do I need to keep the purchasing power so that I do not lose anything? I think you already know it should be 110. But how much am I getting? Now, because I already said it's 120, right? Remember, I will receive 120 to begin with. Now, think about it. I receive 120, which is larger than the should be amount. 我而家係咪反而嗱本身啊？如果我得10% 通脹，其實我收你10% 就夠㗎啦，係咪？我收你10% 就夠㗎啦。But because the interest rate is fixed, I'm going to receive 120 anyway, since it is fixed, right? Now I find that this 120 is actually bigger than the should be value of 110. Now therefore, you see, in this case, me as a lender would gain something because I miscalculated or I guess it wrong. Here, the inflation rate, the expected inflation rate, and the actual inflation rate, I misguess it. Therefore, I have some unexpected gain. Now, let's do a case 2 here. Now, what if it's the opposite? What if it's the opposite? What if actually there is no change in? Okay, there is no change. Actually no. There is 30%, not no change. Okay, there is 30%, the actual inflation. So, in order to keep the same purchasing power, I need 130. Now, unfortunately, what I receive here, I'm only receiving 120, which do not hit the 130. Okay? Do not hit the 130. Therefore, in this case, you see, I, as a lender of money, because of the unexpected inflation in this case, I actually lose money. Okay? Unexpectedly, I lose some money out of expectation. Okay, now, so this is the numerical story. Now, we haven't gone into the so-called more systematic way, right? But hopefully, this will give you an idea what we are going to talk about the so-called unexpected inflation. Okay, 好嘛？嗱，希望你明啦。Now, here, by adjusting the interest rate, but by not matching the actual inflation, okay, then the lenders or borrowers, or sometimes we call it the payer, right? Here, the one who is paying or the one who will be receiving money will actually unexpectedly gain some money or lose some money, right? Now, here, in this table, now, let me use Fisher's equation to demonstrate what is going on here. Okay? 好嘛？嗱，試下啦。Now, let's say this is case 1, case 2, and case 3. 我哋試下啦噃，好嘛？ Now, case 1. Now, remember, always like this. Fisher's equation. Nominal interest rate equals to actual. Okay? Actual. actual real plus actual inflation. On the other hand, we have expected real plus expected inflation. 得唔得？嗱，呢個啦，基本啦。嗱 ，let's go to first case. 嗱 ，let's imagine. 嗱 ，for simplicity reason, all the cases, nominal interest rate, I set it as 10%. Okay, meaning today I lend you 100. Tomorrow you're going to return to me 110. 係咪？還多10蚊俾我啦，好冇？嗱 ，here let's sub in some number here. Let's sub in some number. Okay. Now imagine, the first case, when actual inflation is the same as expected. Let's say is 5% and 5%. So, what happens to the expected real return and the actual real return? You will see that, well, it's the same, right? 同樣喎， when it is the same, is there any gain or loss? No, everything as planned. Okay, now this case, we do not have any unexpected inflation or unexpected deflation. Okay, 好嘛？ Now, second case, 我哋望第二個 case 啊。Now, second case. This time, we say the expected inflation rate is bigger than the actual. So, let's imagine this is 8% and this is 5%. Okay, so what happens is that you will find that the actual real return to be bigger than the expected. So what does that mean? Your actual, okay, actual, let's say, since we know actual bigger than real, right? So the actual receive would be bigger than the expected receive. Or you can change another perspective. The actual pay would be greater than the expected pay. 係咪？你實際收嘅錢會多過以前啊嘛，係咪？會多過啦。So here, let's say, what happens is that you will see now, since we actually paying more purchasing power out, what does that mean? 喂，實際俾多咗出去喎 ，so you are losing, right? You will experience a loss. This is what I say in the above table, right? Right? In the above table. No. Actual receive bigger than actual expected receive. This is a gain. So sorry No. Pay is loss. 我講啱，但係我對錯咗啊，係咪 ？Actual pay greater than expected pay, meaning you need to actually pay more than expected. Therefore, if you have borrowed money yesterday, today you need to return money. Of course, the interest rate doesn't change. You actually loses unexpected loss because the actual payment is more than the expected payment. Okay, 得唔得？ So the opposite, the recipient or the lender 借錢嗰個啦，借出去嗰個係咪之後會收錢啊？ They gain. Okay, 得唔得？好啦 ，case three. Case 3, the opposite. Now, expected inflation smaller than actual inflation. So, what would happen? Now, let's imagine. This time, expected inflation is 5%. Actual inflation is 8%. So, what does that mean? That means the expected real return would be 5%. Actual real return will be 2%. So now we know actual smaller than expected when it comes to the real return. OK 嗱，原來我哋講 real return 啊，今次係。So what happens is that now we just plug in the words 嗱，應該咁講。Our conclusion, actual real is smaller than expected real. Now, and then we plug in some words and we will get the conclusion. When actual receive 我實際收到嘅，比我預期收到嘅 smaller than my expected amount of receipt, then I am losing here. So, who would receive money later? Again, lender of money now will receive money tomorrow. Therefore, in this case, they will lose. Unexpectedly, they lose money. Right? Unexpectedly, they lose. Now, the other, of course, will gain, right? Because here, when the actual pay 實質要俾出去嘅嘢有冇 expect 嘅咁多啊 ？Is you are paying much less than the expected. Now, therefore, you will gain in this case. Who will pay money? Borrower of today. Today I borrow money. Tomorrow I will pay money. So the payer will actually gain. Okay, so this is the logic behind using Fisher's equation to explain the logic behind. Okay, now I know the logic may be a little bit complicated. Okay, now unfortunately, this is the way you need to go when you answer short question. Now, what about MCs? Yes, MCs, we actually have a much easier way to think because when doing MC, we do not need to pay attention to all this actual expected, all those things. No, 我哋唔需要諗咁多嘢啊。We only need to think about the purchasing power. Now, I'll talk about that very soon. All right. So this is the theory behind the so-called redistribution effect of unexpected or unanticipated inflation or deflation. Okay, 好嘛？嗱 before we move on to do the questions, now we need to tackle something first. First, remember, if interest rate is floating, meaning it changes with actual inflation, then there will be no redistribution effect. I think you already know why, right? 係咪？ If it can freely adjust, then every time these two will be the same, right? Expected and actual, they will always be the same because it is freely adjustable. 係咪？ It will always be the same. There will be no gain or loss. Now, another thing, when it comes to the so-called Fisher's equation, we keep on saying inflation rate, expected inflation rate, actual inflation rate, right? Now remember, this is only a name. It only means percentage change in price level, nothing else. Although the name is called inflation rate, it is not inflation. Okay? Because a negative inflation rate would actually means a drop in price level. 嗱，記住係個名嚟嘅咋，呢個唔係一個 inflation 嚟㗎。Okay, we don't know whether this is an inflation. Okay, now so I think some of you up to here with all this theory, your head is already spinning around, right? 係咪開始有啲亂啦？ So don't worry. We are going to do some consolidation work using some real examples here. Now let's turn to the next page, in which we are going to look at a lot of examples in order to consolidate what we have learned just now. Okay, 嚟啦喎。Now, a very old question back in 2000, okay, back in 2000, it says, Mr. A borrows money from a bank for a housing mortgage at a very important fixed interest rate. Now, therefore, there would be redistribution effects if okay if there is unexpected inflation or unexpected deflation。 OK 係嘛？好啦 ，fix 嘅係咪都俾7%？ After that, sorry 啊 ，the general price level falls continuously. Now think about it. What happens is that when price level decreases, the purchasing power of money would go up. 係咪啊？呢嘢平咗，即係啲錢等使咗咯。Now it says in this event, Mr. A loses and the bank gains. Now think about why. Now here, remember, we have established that price level decreased, therefore purchasing power would increase. 嗱呢個冇爭議啊應該。Now think about the role of Mr. A. He is a borrower of money. Therefore, later on, he would need to pay back the money. Now, immediately, we write down the word pay, 因為佢要俾錢㗎嘛。Then what happens? We copy this sentence. We copy this. Put it down here. Pay. Since we are higher purchasing power, we are paying more purchasing power. 原來係俾多咗 purchasing power 出去啊。When he pay more money， 好啦，如果我而家要你俾多啲錢出去，即係你賺定蝕啊 ？Of course, you are at a loss, right? So Mr. A loss 係咪？係咪簡潔好多啊？同我哋頭先睇嗰啲 expected 啊嗰啲係咪簡潔好多啊？嗱 ，this is the way we can think about it in MC, right? Much easier， 係咪 ？So let's see which one. This is because the answer is actually D. When general price level keep on falling, purchasing power of a fixed amount of interest will increase. 係咪啊？啲錢越嚟啲物價水平越嚟越低，同樣都係還10蚊啦，但係嗰10蚊係越嚟越值錢啊，因為呢嘢平啊，即係變相你係還多咗 purchasing power 嚇 ，you are paying more purchasing power, therefore you lose money. Right? Now here. Look at A, B, C. A. The value has been falling. Do you know? 佢有冇講樓價冇跌啊 ？No. Mr. A's wage income has been falling. Did they say anything about the income? No. 係咪冇講過喎？係嘛 ？The bank can sell the house if Mr. A fails to repay loan. Well, actually, this is true for both inflation and deflation. 喂。我話知佢通脹定通縮啊 ？No matter is inflation or deflation, if he cannot return the money, then his house will be confiscated。係唔係都俾人沒收㗎啦？咁關 general price level 咩事啊 ？It has nothing to do with general price level, irrelevant to price level. OK， 好嘛 ？This answer irrelevant to price level. So this is the first question. Now let's move on. Now in practice paper.We further establish the idea that real value of money decreases. Okay, when will real value or here sometimes the better word is purchasing power of money will decrease when general price level is rising. 係咪？嗱呢個你自己記咗佢麻煩你。Okay, always when general price level increases.Purchasing power of money will decrease. Always. 嗱，你呢個唔記嘅話，我幫你唔到㗎。OK， 好嘛？嗱 ，next one. Practice paper 31. Now, finally, we are into the meat of this chapter. Now, most of the question you find in later pages would be like this. They will ask you, which of the following people will lose or gain?When unexpected inflation occurs. Now, let's learn the word. Unexpected inflation. Oh, I should have written in previous page. I'm so sorry, right? Now, there are some terms that we need to remember. In exam, when it says unexpected inflation, it does not mean inflation. It only means 嗱，即係咩意思呢？ Unexpected inflation 嘅意思就係 it only means actual inflation rate is bigger than the so-called expected inflation rate. It can be a negative number. If it is a negative number, then it is a deflation. So don't be fooled by the name inflation. Unexpected inflation only means actual inflation bigger than expected inflation. Okay, so unexpected deflation would mean the opposite, right? Actual inflation is smaller than expected inflation. Again, it doesn't mean deflation. These can be positive number, meaning it may be an inflation. Maybe. OK 嗱，唔好俾佢呃到啊！呢、個 unexpected inflation 意思即係實際個通脹率大過實際嗰個所謂 inflation rate 大過 expected inflation rate 咋，冇其他意思啦。OK 得唔得？好，翻返轉頭。Now here, let's write down something first. Now once we know what unexpected inflation means, we can write it out. Unexpected inflation means the actual inflation is bigger than expected inflation. Okay, now this is the only thing we need to know. 好啦，嗱 think about it. If actually 如果實際個通脹率係高 ，what does that mean? Whenever inflation rate is high, it means that purchasing power would drop, just like that. 你咁諗得㗎啦，好嘛？而家實際通脹率大啊嘛，咪即係 purchasing power 跌咯。Relatively speaking, of course. Now we will learn how to write it when it comes to a short question. But for MC, let's think in this way. Okay? Now this is a key word. Purchasing power will decrease. 好啦，跟住啦就嚟咯喎。We will do copy and paste a lot. Okay? Now A， 我哋要邊個 loser 好嘛？An individual holding time deposit in a bank. Now remember, if you're a holder of time deposit, you put money in today, tomorrow, or when it mature, you receive money. 跌筆添。嗱 so let's write down receive. 嗱，因為我收錢啊嘛，係咪？好啦，跟住 copy and paste this guy into here. What does PP decrease mean? It means receive less purchasing power than expected. 好啦，收少咗即係賺定蝕啊 ？Of course, this is a loss. 收少咗錢啊嘛，so he would lose when there is an unexpected inflation. OK， 好嘛？嗱 B。A holder of government bonds with interest rates. Now, I think some of you may be tempted to think, holder, then later on they will receive money. But remember, adjusted according to the inflation rate, meaning this guy is floating. Floating will have no effect. 逢親流動就冇 effect 㗎啦。Actual and expected will always be the same because of the floating mechanism, so not B. Now C, a flat owner repaying a fixed rate. 嗱緊要啦 fixed, right? So since he's repaying, right, pay, then copy and paste less PP. 咦，俾少咗錢喎，咁佢賺定蝕啊？ This is a gain. Okay, not the answer we want. Now finally, D, keeping all his wealth in the form of gold. Now remember, when we talk about redistribution effect, it hinges on the value of money changing with inflation rate. This time we are talking about gold. Whenever we are not talking about money, 嗱 gold 唔係 money 啦 ，it will be irrelevant. OK， 當我哋唔係講錢啊嘅時候咧 redistribution effect will be irrelevant. OK， since we are not talking about money. OK， We are not talking about money. 好嘛? So D is also not correct. Now, let's do the next one. Next one. Here, the same. The US government has accumulated a large amount of debt, right? Around this amount. If there is an unexpected inflation, immediately, let's remind ourselves, unexpected inflation means actual inflation is bigger than expected inflation. Actually, inflation is high. 係咪你咁諗得㗎啦? When actually inflation is high, 嗱唔一定嘅，不過我哋咁諗啫。It means purchasing power would drop. Okay, now this one we will copy and paste 4 times. Okay, 好嘛？嗱嚟啦喎。First, Hong Kong residents holding cash in Hong Kong dollar under the linked exchange rate system. Now, obviously, we have not learned what is the so-called linked exchange rate system. Okay, now, but let's just say this one is irrelevant for our time being. Okay, irrelevant. Now, B, U.S. citizens holding time deposit. Remember, when you hold a time deposit today, tomorrow you receive money. Okay, so you will receive. Then copy and paste this guy. Receive less PP. 收少錢即係賺定蝕啊？收少錢 you loses. Okay, this is a loss. Not the answer we want. We need to gain. C. Countries holding a large amount of bonds. When they hold bonds, later on they also receive. 嗱，我唔抄啦嘛。Receive, you know, this is gonna be a loss. Who gains then? Actually, the U.S. government, because you are the so-called bond issuer, meaning you owe other money. 你係爭人錢嗰個啊。So later on, you will pay. 你係咪俾出去啊？俾咩啊 ？Less PP。好啦，俾少咗錢，賺定蝕啦 ？You gain。係嘛 ？Right? So this question, okay, in fact, tells you the reason why U.S. they love to inflate their economy. 點解咁中意通脹啊？還少啲錢咯！你班傻仔係咁問我借係咁食我啲國債啊？係咪啊 ？You stupid, foolish! You keep buying my bond. Later on, when I give you back my bond, you receive less purchasing power. 你咪智障咯，你咪低 B 仔咯，係咪啊？美國就係咁啦。This is exactly the U.S. government. OK， 好唔好啊？嗱，呢個真㗎。嗱 ，this is very truthful. OK， this is exactly the reason. 喂，唔好窒住。This is exactly the reason. How come the U.S. government they always want inflation in their country so that they return less money？ 真㗎，呢個真㗎，唔係呃你㗎，好嘛？ Alright, now let's move on then to the next page. Now, next page, you see, we are going to repeat ourselves again and again and again and again because this is the nature of this chapter. Okay, 好吧？嗱嚟咯，which of the following people would benefit from an so-called unanticipated inflation？ 嗱又嚟多次啦 ，unanticipated or unexpected. It means the actual inflation is bigger than expected inflation. When actually there is higher inflation rate, it only means that, what does that mean? It means that purchasing power would drop. 咪跌咯，係嘛 ？Purchasing power of money would drop relative to what we have expected. Then we'll copy and paste this guy to 4 of them, right? 好啦 ，would benefit. We need someone to benefit, right? So here, first, a loan shark who lends out a sum of money at floating. Now, whenever you see the word floating, immediately you see there will be no effect. 逢親 floating 唔關你事，得唔得？講咗10萬次啦。Second, a manager who receive a fixed salary. Now, we are talking about fixed. So, yes, we need to think about something. manager receives 嗱，佢俾咗你啦，係咪啊？照抄啦，好冇？receive receive what？ receive less PP 嗱，我唔寫 less 啦，好嘛 ？receive less， therefore gain or loss 收少咗錢，梗係蝕啦 ，loss right？OK， 好嘛？嗱 C。A flat owner who repays are fixed. So pay 佢係講明俾錢啊嘛，係咪 ？Pay less 好啦，我想問啦，俾少咗賺定蝕啦 ？Of course, this is a gain. C would be the answer. Okay, now D. A retired teacher receives dividend again. Receive 係咪 ？This one receive.Therefore, is a loss. 得唔得 ？Okay, so this is exactly how to do it. 嗱係嘛？嗱 ，first, I think at the beginning of the video, when you listen to me, it isn't quite clear what exactly that means. But when it comes to doing question, you see, it's actually quite easy, quite formulaic. I would even put it that way， 係咪啊？好公式化嗰啲嘢，好嘛 ？So let's see next question. Now, which of the following about inflation is correct? Let's see. Inflation occurs when the government hand out a large sum of money to every citizen in a certain year. Remember, when you have a sum of money, then the so-called disposable income will increase, meaning AD would increase, and the so-called price level would also increase. But is that an inflation? No, because when we hand out a large sum of money, cash, this is a one-off. Remember when we talk about inflation, it has to be a persistent increase. Therefore, number one is wrong. 一係錯啦，好冇？ Now, number two, inflation redistributes wealth from lender to debtors. Okay, if it is anticipated， 喂，我想講啦，由頭到尾 ，from the beginning of this video, we are talking about unanticipated when expected, not the same as actual, right? If it is anticipated, that means actual and expected would be the same， 係咪啊？一樣啊嘛，一樣會唔會有 redistribution 啊 ？No. So answer is C. Okay, now let's see. Number three, people prefer to hold real asset to cash under expected inflation. 正常啦。When inflation, cash, the purchasing power would drop. Real asset, they would rather hold real asset to preserve value. 係咪啊？唔係，有冇聽過啲人講啦？通脹買黃金揸磚頭好過啦，即係買樓啊，係咪啊？好過揸錢啦。Okay, so this is exactly what's going on. Now, next one. Let's quickly. When unanticipated deflation, immediacy. Remember, unanticipated or unexpected deflation, it means the actual inflation is smaller than the expected inflation. So think of it like this. Actual inflation is small, 係咪啊？知唔知啊？好細啦，今次。What does that mean? It means that, relatively speaking, purchasing power would go up because actual is smaller， 係咪？實際上唔計實際上係細啲啊嘛，係咪？實際上個通脹率細啊嘛。Therefore, purchasing power would, relatively speaking, increase. OK， 嗱跟住啦，又係啦 ，you know the drill, right? We will copy and paste these to the following four. OK, first, repaying a fixed amount. Now it says fixed, right? And pay， 佢講明 pay 啊嘛，咪寫個 pay 字落嚟咯。Pay more 啊 ，PP， 喂，俾多咗錢，我想問你賺定蝕啊？俾多咗錢 ，of course you lose. This is the loss, right? A is the answer that we want, right? Now look at B, C, and D. B, people receiving interest from their saving deposit. Now it says very clearly, receive, right? Then copy more 收多咗喎， 收多咗賺定蝕啦 ？Of course, it's a gain, right? Now, C, people repaying mortgage at a floating floating go to die. Okay, no effect. Working under a fixed nominal wage contract. Okay, now when they're working, they receive money, right? 係咪啊？佢返工啊嘛，咁咪收人工咯。Receive more. When they receive more, they gain, which is not the answer that we want. Okay, so this is the way we tackle MC. Just look at whether actual is bigger or smaller. If it's bigger, then purchasing power will drop, relatively speaking. If actual is smaller, then purchasing power will drop, relatively speaking. OK 嗱 ，MC 就好易諗㗎，係咪？其實咁樣諗得㗎啦。Now, what about when it comes to the short questions? How do we write it? OK, now let's see. Here, we need to explain whether the following person would gain or lose in times of unexpected deflation. OK, now, of course, this is an old question. Now, new question would not make pass like this because first, you need to explain in both parts what is unexpected deflation. Remember, you need to write unexpected deflation, meaning the actual inflation rate is smaller than the expected inflation rate. 得唔得？ Therefore, relatively speaking, the actual purchasing power of money will be lower. Actually higher than expected. 比預期高啊嘛，係咪？ Relatively speaking, actual purchasing power of money would be higher than expected. Now, therefore, 嗱好啦，嗱呢句啫，其實呢句緊要啫，之後嗰啲都唔重要啦。嗱 ，let's look at part 1 and part 2. Part 1 it says, suppose an individual borrowed at a fixed interest rate. Now, when they borrow money, later on, they need to pay back the money. Now, let's copy this. Actual purchasing power higher than expected, meaning increase, right? So, it will be paying more purchasing power than expected. So, this is a loss for that person. OK 嗱係咪啊？嗱你見我哋寫係好煩㗎 ，it's quite difficult to write it out, right? So you may need to recite how to write it out. But when it comes to MC, you do not need to be so systematic. You just think like this, OK 好嘛？係寫字有啲難啫。OK 嗱 ，let's look at part 2 as well. Part 2, suppose I retired, receive 咁咪就係咯。咁你寫翻呢個 receive. Now since it is just the opposite of part 1. Write it by yourself. 我唔寫啦，好嘛？呢個同 part 1倒轉㗎，好嘛？ So they're receiving more purchasing power than expected, then they will gain, right? 係咪？好啦，唔講啦。Now next one, next page. How many pages do we have? Well, 2 more pages to go. 嗱 almost there. Okay, now here, 2005. 好似歐科係嘛？ Yes. Now, 2005 question from 2005. Here, let's see. Here, suppose people did not expect any change. Now, what does that mean? It means expected inflation rate is 0%. Did not expect any change. However, look at the table. From the table, 2001 to 2003, you see the GDP deflator is decreasing. 一路跌緊喎。That means the actual inflation rate is actually smaller than 0. What does that mean? It means that for this question, we can observe there is actually an unexpected deflation. Now, what does that mean? Unexpected deflation means the actual inflation rate is smaller than expected inflation rate. Now, therefore, relatively speaking, 好啦，即係咩意思啊？ Relatively speaking, the purchasing power of money would be higher than expected. Sorry, I should have added the word actual purchasing power of money would be higher than expected. Okay, now therefore, let's see which one gain or which one lose. Okay, now here, a businessman who obtain a bank loan. When they have obtain a bank loan, what does that mean? So it means later on they need to pay. 好啦, this one pay since it's higher, pay more. So this is a lose. Okay, B opposite. 唔講啦. Okay, now so you see, right? This type of question, as long as you get this right, the first step right, then immediately no difficulty at all. Right? 好嘛，唔嘥時間啦。Okay, now next one. Let's look at the next question. 2009, the year after my CE exam. Right? Here, let's see. Now refer to the following information on economy A. Right? Now, question A asks, what is inflation? Remember, inflation is a persistent increase in price level. Now, very important keyword, persistent. Okay, 要 persistent 先得㗎，好嘛？ Now, in this table, now, part B, it says, did not expect any change in price level. So, again, expected inflation is 0%. What about the actual inflation? This one, is it dropping? Is it deflation? No. Growth rate, as long as it is positive, it means it is increasing. Now, what does that mean? It means that actual inflation rate is bigger than 0%. So, from this observation, we would know that there is an unexpected inflation going on. Unexpected inflation, meaning the actual inflation is bigger than the expected inflation. Now, therefore, relatively speaking, we would know purchasing power of money would fall relative to expected. So, let's see. This guy borrow a housing mortgage loan from a bank at a fixed. Therefore, there will be effect, right? He borrowed. So later on, since he borrowed money, later on, he would need to pay money back. 佢要俾返錢嘛? So, he is paying. We just talked about, right? Purchasing power decrease. Less purchasing power than expected. So, gain or loss, clearly, pay less thing. This is a gain. 賺咗咯，係咪啊？咪賺咗咯。Okay, so this is the way we do this kind of question. Okay, now one final question, and we can launch this rather long video. 係咪呢個 topic 都長㗎，多嘢講都冇辦法，好嘛？嗱，喂，唔好就記住，喂，收工啦，唔好就記住。喂 ，okay, here. Now finally, let's look at the final question of this topic. Okay, now 2014. First, we need to calculate the inflation rate. Now, I don't know whether you remember how to calculate inflation rates. Now, remember, inflation rates will be new price index minus old price index. divided by old price index times 100%. Now, because of time limitation, I'll give you here is 5%. 唔睇啦，5%. Okay. Now, part B, we have already done it in previous video. Now, I'm not going to waste your time here. 好嘛？ Now, finally, let's look at part C. Suppose people did not expect any change in the price level from 2012 to 2013, right? Therefore, remember, expected inflation will be 0%. 好嘛？ 0%. What about actual inflation? We just talked about. Actual inflation is 5%. So, we will know this is a case of unexpected inflation, meaning purchasing power of money would relatively speaking fall. 係咪 unexpected inflation? Now, therefore, C1, what's going on? C1, you say this guy, Kidman, borrowed a housing mortgage. Therefore, later on, Kidman would pay. Then copy and paste this guy. This guy, copy and paste. Pay less purchasing power than expected. 好啦，俾少咗喎，賺定蝕啊 ？Of course, this is a gain. Okay, now when it comes to the final part is a rather funny question. Now, let's look at what it says. 2012. This, I think, is the lady, right? Invested in a project with expected nominal rate of return of 12. In later year, she discovered the actual nominal rate of return was like this. 咦，點解俾咁多數字嚟嘅？ How come it give you so much figures? So many figures, right? What's going on? Now, this time, it's expecting you to utilize these figures. Okay, 好嘛？ So, let's use our old friend, Fisher's equation. Now, remember, Fisher equation, number 1. Nominal equals to the so-called, okay, expected real plus expected real percentage, okay? Expected inflation rate. This is our number 1 Fisher's equation. Now, therefore, let's substitute number in. Okay, now remember, expected inflation in this question already says is 0. This is 0. The nominal rate of return is 12. So, we know that the expected real return is 12%. 原來我哋預期自己係會賺12% 嘅。Now, second version of Fisher's equation, the actual real percentage plus the actual inflation rate. Okay, 得唔得？嚟啦噃。Now, according to the question, we have already calculated the actual inflation rate is 5% here. So, 5%, and she found that the actual nominal rate of return. So, we sub in nominal, 15%. We will get, the actual real return is 10%. Now you see, since actual real return, which is 10%, is smaller than expected real return, which is 12% here. Therefore, this is a loss. 你實質上實際少過比預期少嗎？ This is a loss because of unexpected inflation. OK， 好嘛? So I think this question is rather interesting, okay? Because it is not using the normal concepts or not our normal thinking, but this time requires you to use Fisher's equation to compare this guy, expected real return and the actual real return. OK 好嘛？嗱呢條比較難少少嘅，but 嗱 overall speaking, right? When we talk about the so-called redistribution effect, remember the trick that we use for most of our MC. Just think about whether the purchasing power increase or decrease, and then copy and paste. OK 係咪？原來諗嘅過程咁就得㗎啦。OK, so hopefully this is not too difficult for you. Now, my advice, make sure this video you understand the content of this video, because this is the most difficult part of this whole chapter. Okay, now, so next and final video, we are going to deal with one last topic. We call it the quantity theory of money. Okay, so see you again in next video. Bye bye.